Good evening and welcome to the Justice Factor. Coming to you live from our Hyde Park studios, I'm Ben Said, standing in for Justice Malala, who's on a well-earned holiday. Tonight, Ahang leader Mamphela Ramphele opens up her bank accounts, reveals she's worth 55 million rand and that she benefited from black economic empowerment. We ask whether this is a smart move or is she a hypocrite? Also, workers at SAA and other airlines, builders, clothing manufacturers and gold miners are all set to go on strike this week. Is this another big blow to the image of South Africa's economy? And President Zuma's legal team says it'll appeal a court decision forcing the MPA to hand over the so-called spy tapes. Is there a firm legal basis for this, or is it just another delaying tactic? Plus, we take a comprehensive look at a set of figures coming out of the presidency, which gives us a fascinating look at how far South Africa has come since 1994 and where we are now. And then there's our usual winner and loser of the week. But let's get right to it. Joining me are Stephen Grootes, senior political reporter at Eyewitness News and host of the Midday Report, and also Mpumelelo Mkhabela, editor of the Seg1. Welcome, gentlemen. First of all, if I can turn to you, Mpumelelo. Ahang leader Mamphela Ramphele reveals she's worth 55 million rand. That's an unimaginable sum for many South Africans. Was she wise to do this, do you think?
Under the current political climate in South Africa, a political climate where politicians hide basically everything about themselves, yet they are responsible for public decisions, I think any form of disclosure is warranted and necessary. However, the problem is that we're not used to those kind of politics here. MPs in Parliament, they declare up to a certain extent, they declare their business interest, but they don't declare how much those interests are worth. So when she goes to Parliament, assuming she's going to get enough votes for her to go to Parliament, she'll be able to disclose even more. The trouble, though, is that you have to take the disclosure to a logical conclusion. It's not only political leaders that are in charge of public policy. It's also their political parties. Who is funding these political parties? If her disclosure is going to be taken to the logical conclusion about who's funding her party, and it's going to lead us to debate broadly about whose interest are politicians serving in South Africa, then it was a good decision. But whether or not we're going to get there, it's another point.
Yeah, fair enough. And Stephen, the ANC called it a political stunt. Do you think it was a good move?
I think the main aim was not to talk about her own money. It was to force the political offensive onto President Jacob Zuma and the DA and to essentially say, you guys must do the same thing. In this, I'm afraid she's failed spectacularly. She's not managed to control the debate to get it there. There was a day or two of debate on that score, but immediately it went back to her own money. And there are ways to spin around that. There are ways for her to get that debate back to President Jacob Zuma, back to the Democratic Alliance. Ask the DA why it joined the ANC in going to court in stopping the party funding, where the money is coming from, actually coming out. Start talking more about Chancellor House. I think she failed through a few reasons. One, she just didn't do her own homework. They should have known the Forbes story was there. It was history, and it showed her to be worth a lot more. So it makes her look like a hypocrite. I think the other thing is also the spin machine around Mamphela Ramphele. Spin matters more in our politics than it's ever done before, and it's simply not up to it.
So, I mean, 55 million rand, how do you think South Africans, ordinary voters, are going to feel about that in Mpumelelo? Does it matter that she's worth that much money?
Well, they need to understand why she's disclosing in the first place. I think she comes from a point of view that says that she wants to show that she's transparent. She wants to contrast herself with President Jacob Zuma, who's increasingly seen by certain sections of the population as hiding something. Whether you look at the spy tapes or you look at the building of Mkhabela, people increasingly think that the president is hiding something. Who is funding her? Who's funding her lifestyle, her expensive lifestyle? And she's saying, here I am, I'm disclosing what I have. But the problem is that you have a politician who is seen as opulent, as being wealthy. And South Africans may have an issue. How can the person who's wealthy like that represent us, the downtrodden? Because the majority in South Africa are poor. And in a society where we talk about huge inequalities, she represents the other end of the inequality. So it might have unintended consequences, although I don't think that's what she wanted. She wanted she meant well, but it has backfired, as Stephen says. And I think, in my opinion, for her to actually take the argument to its logical conclusion, she must also disclose who is funding her party.
Moving on, Stephen, COSATU strikes and other unions striking this week across multiple sectors in the economy. What does this say about the strength of COSATU in particular?
I think we might remember this year's sort of strikes, as it were, as perhaps the last time we see strikes like this. We've had a situation where COSATU is under severe strain at the moment. Everyone knows that. If they aren't talking about a split in COSATU, are talking about very real damage being done to COSATU anyway. And when you get right down to it, NUMSA, for example, engaged in a major strike at the moment. If it breaks away from COSATU, not all of NUMSA would go, some of it would stay. The COSATU would immediately start another automobile or another metalworkers union as well. So suddenly you would have splits, rivalries, all sorts of things. In a way, this might be the peak of the power of the workers for a time. I can't see how COSATU gets back from here. I can't see how this series of strike ends in a victory for workers, because the employers know that unity matters, and that unity, as we've seen, has literally exploded.
And Mpumelelo, moving on to the spy tapes. Now, of course, Jacob Zuma's legal team has said that it will appeal the High Court ruling that the NPA must hand over the tapes to the DA. Any idea why they're doing this? I mean, these tapes are supposed to essentially show President Jacob Zuma in a good light, show there was a political conspiracy against him. What's there to hide?
Look, we can't speculate what's in the mind of President Jacob Zuma. It's difficult. It's difficult to imagine what is he actually thinking about. Why is he appealing through and through? All I can say is that it is clear that the consequences are dire, because he's putting the legal system in a quandary. You are asking a lower court to overturn a decision of a higher court. Remember the decision to the judgment that says that the tapes should be released was a judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal. Now you are asking a lower court to overturn that decision, which failed in the first place. That's what failed. And when that decision was taken that he should indeed release the tapes within 5 days, he now decides to appeal. If he appeals to the Supreme Court of Appeal, he can't ask the Supreme Court of Appeal to overturn its original decision. And if asked the lower court to overturn that decision, it's unthinkable that the lower court can overturn a decision of a higher court. So the legal system is put in a quandary now, and the NPA is sitting there, not appealing, but waiting to see where the president is going. It's quite an intriguing situation. How it's going to resolve itself, it will be something else.
Stephen, I just want to bring you here. Is this in any way, do you think, a stalling tactic to delay a possible review of the decision?
It can't be anything else. It has to be that. And the simple reason is that clearly the president is deeply worried, deeply concerned, and simply fears these tapes being released. He believes, surely, the only interpretation can be that if the DA gets these tapes, if it uses those tapes as a basis to review the decision to withdraw the charges against him, he fears that decision. He is worried about that case. There is no other reason for him to delay here. And if there is another reason, let's hear it. Let's let the nation decide. The simple fact is, if you ask the people around President Jacob Zuma, why is he appealing? The simple answer is, let the legal processes go where they may. You don't get an answer. Why not? I believe that in a country where people vote for the person who leads the country, they vote for the party that person represents, he owes us an explanation.
Thank you very much. You're both lots more to discuss there. After the break, South Africa's development indicators and the fascinating and sometimes surprising things that they tell us about this country.
News that moves. ENCA.com.